The morning sun painted golden stripes across the playground of New Tokyo Elementary School. 7-year-old Kenji Nakamura kicked a soccer ball against the concrete wall, counting each bounce in his head. His black hair stuck to his forehead with sweat, and his school uniform was already dusty from the morning's play. He didn't notice the shadow that fell across the playground until it was too late. The Craxian battlecruiser descended through Earth's atmosphere like a metal mountain falling from the sky. Its hull, covered in weaponry that looked like thorns on a rose stem, blocked out the sun completely. Children screamed and ran for the school building, but Kenji stood frozen, the soccer ball rolling away from his feet. Ambassador Sarah Chen was in the middle of a trade negotiation meeting when her assistant burst through the door. The young man's face was white as paper. "Ambassador, we have a code black situation. The Craxian Empire has entered Earth's airspace without permission." Sarah's coffee cup hit the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The Craxian Empire controlled over 300 star systems and commanded the most powerful military force in the known galaxy. Earth had only joined the Galactic Council 5 years ago. They were like ants compared to the Craxians. "Where?" she demanded, already reaching for her emergency communication device. "New Tokyo. A battlecruiser is hovering over an elementary school." The blood drained from Sarah's face. This wasn't just a diplomatic incident. This was a threat to children, to human children. On the playground, Kenji watched as a beam of light shot down from the ship. The air shimmered like water, and 3 figures materialized in front of him. The Craxians stood 9 feet tall, their bodies covered in natural armor that looked like polished obsidian. Their forearms ended in claws that could tear through steel. Their eyes, 6 of them arranged in a circle around their heads, all focused on the small human boy. Commander Thrax looked down at the child with disgust. Humans were new to the galactic community, barely worth noticing. But their rapid expansion and refusal to pay tribute to the Empire had become annoying. The Empire had decided to send a message. A small message. One dead human child would teach these primitives their place in the galaxy. "You are nothing," Thrax said, his translator converting his words into Japanese. "Your species is nothing. Today, you will learn why the Craxian Empire rules the stars." Kenji's legs shook, but he didn't run. His mother had always told him to be brave, even when scared. "My name is Kenji," he said, his small voice barely a whisper. "Why are you being mean?" The innocence of the question made Commander Thrax pause for exactly 1 second. Then he raised his primary arm, energy gathering around his clawed hand. The death would be quick, at least. A small mercy for a small, worthless life. The energy blast never came. Sarah Chen's voice erupted from every speaker, every communication device, every piece of technology within 100 miles. Her words were calm, measured, but underneath them was something that made even the Craxian commander take a step back. "Commander Thrax of the Craxian Empire, I am Ambassador Sarah Chen of Earth. You have exactly 10 seconds to step away from that child." Thrax laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "You dare threaten the Craxian Empire, primitive? We could turn your entire planet to ash before your sun sets." 9 seconds, Sarah continued, as if she hadn't heard him. In her office at the Earth Embassy, Sarah's hands flew over holographic displays. She was activating protocols that had been written but never used. Protocols that every human diplomat knew by heart, but prayed they would never need. The Broken Arrow Protocol, the Last Stand Directive, the End Game Scenario. 8 seconds. Thrax's 6 eyes narrowed. He had conquered dozens of worlds, crushed civilizations that had existed for millennia. This human diplomat was bluffing. She had to be. Earth had no fleet to speak of. No weapons that could threaten even the smallest Craxian patrol ship. 7 seconds. But something in her voice made him hesitate. It wasn't fear he heard. It wasn't desperation. It was certainty. Absolute, terrifying certainty. 6 seconds. On every human colony, on every ship with human crew, on every station where humans lived or worked, the same message appeared. Broken arrow. All personnel to battle stations. This is not a drill. 5 seconds. Thrax's second-in-command grabbed his arm. Sir, their military bases are powering up something. Our sensors can't identify the energy signature. 4 seconds. Across Earth, silo doors that had been sealed for decades began to open. Not the nuclear silos. Those were relics of a darker age. These silos contained something far more terrible. Something humans had created in secret after first contact, when they realized how small and vulnerable they were in a galaxy full of predators. 3 seconds. Kenji stood perfectly still, tears running down his cheeks, but his chin held high. He thought of his mother, his father, his little sister, who was probably hiding inside the school. He hoped they wouldn't be too sad. 2 seconds. Commander Thrax felt something he hadn't experienced in 300 years of military service. Doubt. The human child stood before him, defenseless, helpless, but unbroken. And somewhere, a human diplomat was counting down to something with the confidence of someone holding a winning hand in a game where the stakes were planetary extinction. 1 second. Thrax lowered his arm. Stand down, he ordered his soldiers. They looked at him in confusion, but obeyed instantly. A wise choice, Commander. Sarah's voice came through clearly. Now, you're going to return to your ship, leave Earth space, and deliver a message to your Emperor. You dare command me? Thrax snarled, but he was already backing away from the child. The message is this, Sarah continued, her voice carrying the weight of 5 billion human souls. Earth may be new to the galaxy. We may be small. We may be primitive by your standards. But if you ever threaten a human child again, we will show you why our species survived on a death world for 200,000 years. We will show you why we split the atom before we cured the common cold. We will show you why we reached for the stars with fire and fury instead of peace and patience. She paused, letting her words sink in. We are not a species that conquered our world, Commander. We are a species that our world failed to kill. Remember that. The transmission ended. Commander Thrax stood in the playground, surrounded by human children who were now peering out from windows and doorways. The little boy, Kenji, had picked up his soccer ball and was hugging it to his chest. Why didn't you run? Thrax asked him, genuine curiosity overcoming his pride. Kenji looked up at the towering alien with eyes that seemed far too old for his age. My papa told me that bullies only win if you let them see you're scared. I was scared, but I didn't let you see. For the first time in centuries, Commander Thrax felt something resembling respect for another species. He turned to his soldiers. We're leaving. As the Craxians dematerialized and their ship began to rise, Thrax opened a channel to his fleet. Set course for Empire Central. Priority 1 message for the Emperor. What message, sir? His communications officer asked. That we may have severely underestimated the humans. Back on the playground, Kenji watched the alien ship disappear into the clouds. His teacher, Mrs. Yamamoto, ran out and swept him into a crushing hug, checking him for injuries. Other children gathered around, some crying, some cheering, all talking at once. In her office, Sarah Chen slumped in her chair, her hands shaking now that the crisis was over. Her assistant brought her a new cup of coffee, which she accepted gratefully. Ambassador, he said quietly, what would you have done if they hadn't backed down? Sarah took a sip of coffee and looked out her window at the Tokyo skyline. Humanity has a saying, David. If you come for the king, you best not miss. They came for our children. They missed. But we don't have any secret weapons. Those silos contain outdated equipment. We couldn't have actually fought the Craxian Empire. Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. No, we couldn't have. But they didn't know that. And sometimes, in diplomacy as in poker, the bluff is all you have. She stood up, straightening her suit. Send a message to all Earth colonies and allied worlds. Tell them what happened here today. Tell them that Earth stood against the Craxian Empire and didn't blink. Yes, Ambassador. Anything else? Yes. Schedule a meeting with the Defense Council. If we're going to bluff our way through galactic politics, we need to make sure that one day it won't be a bluff anymore. As David left to carry out her orders, Sarah looked at the picture on her desk. Her own son, about Kenji's age, smiled back at her from the frame. She touched the picture gently. "Never again," she whispered. "Never again will we be caught defenseless." Across the galaxy, word spread like wildfire through diplomatic channels and black market information brokers. Earth, barely out of its stellar cradle, had faced down the Craxian Empire, and won. Some species laughed, calling it luck. Others whispered that the humans must have made a deal with some darker power. But a few, the wise ones who had studied human history, who had read about their wars and their heroes and their terrible capacity for both creation and destruction, they knew the truth. Humanity had shown its teeth, and the galaxy would never be the same. In the Craxian throne room, Emperor Vrax listened to Commander Thrax's report with growing interest. The massive alien, ancient beyond measure, had ruled for 1,000 years through strength and fear. But he was not stupid. "You believe they were bluffing?" the Emperor asked, his voice like an avalanche. "I cannot be certain, Divine One," Thrax admitted. "But the human child, there was something in his eyes. Something I have seen before, in species that should not have survived but did. Defiance beyond reason. Courage beyond sense." The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. Around the throne room, courtiers and generals held their breath. Finally, Vrax spoke. "Double our intelligence operations on Earth. I want to know everything about these humans. Their weapons, their weaknesses, their dreams, and their nightmares. If they are bluffing, we will call it. If they are not—" He trailed off, but everyone understood. If the humans weren't bluffing, if they had somehow developed weapons that could threaten the Empire, then the balance of power in the galaxy had just shifted. Back on Earth, night had fallen over New Tokyo. Kenji sat at the dinner table with his family, picking at his rice. His parents had been called home from work, and they hadn't stopped hugging him since they arrived. "You were very brave today," his mother said, tears still fresh in her eyes. "I was scared," Kenji admitted. "Being brave doesn't mean not being scared," his father said, reaching across the table to ruffle his son's hair. "Being brave means doing what's right even when you are scared. Is that why the alien left? Because I was brave?" His parents exchanged glances. They had been following the news, seen Ambassador Chen's address to the world. They knew how close they had come to losing everything. "Yes," his mother said simply. "Sometimes being brave is enough to change everything." That night, as Kenji slept safely in his bed, Earth's leaders met in emergency session. The bluff had worked this time, but it wouldn't work forever. Humanity needed to be ready for what was coming. In her apartment, Sarah Chen stood on her balcony, looking up at the stars. Each point of light represented a world, a civilization, a potential threat, or ally. Earth was just one small blue dot in an infinite sea of darkness. But it was their dot, their home. And today, they had defended it with nothing but words and willpower. Tomorrow, they would need more than that. Tomorrow, they would begin to build the future that their bluff had promised, a future where no alien empire would dare threaten a human child again. The stars twinkled overhead, silent witnesses to the moment when humanity announced to the galaxy that they were not prey. They were players, and they were playing to win. The Galactic Council chamber on Nexus Prime was in chaos. Representatives from 100 different species argued, shouted, and in some cases physically fought over the news from Earth. The humans had done the unthinkable. They had faced the Craxian Empire and lived. Zephron Cole, the ancient Alterian who served as council mediator, struck his crystalline staff against the floor 3 times. The sound resonated through the chamber, bringing silence. "Order," he commanded, his telepathic voice touching every mind present. "We will discuss this matter with the dignity befitting the council." The Vraxian representative, a being made entirely of sentient gas, swirled in agitation. "The humans must be punished. Their defiance will inspire other lesser species to resist the natural order." "What natural order?" The question came from Ambassador Chen herself, who had arrived just moments before. She walked to the center of the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. "The order where the strong prey on the weak? Where children are acceptable casualties in your political games?" Murmurs rippled through the assembly. No new species had ever spoken so boldly in the council chamber. "You are out of order, human," growled Thax, the Craxian representative. "Your species has been members for merely 5 cycles. You know nothing of how the galaxy truly works." Sarah smiled, and several representatives actually stepped back. They had studied humans since first contact, and they had learned that when a human smiled during conflict, it rarely meant happiness. "You're right," she said. "We are new here. We don't understand why a civilization that can travel between stars would threaten a 7-year-old child. We don't understand why species that have conquered death itself still rule through fear. But most of all, we don't understand why you all accept it." She turned in a slow circle, making eye contact with as many representatives as she could. "How many of your worlds have lost children to the Empire's demonstrations? How many of your colonies have been burned because you couldn't pay tribute? How many of you live in fear every single day?" Silence greeted her words. Then, from the back of the chamber, a small voice spoke up. It was the representative from Kepler 442b, a world that had joined the Council just 50 years before Earth. "My grandson," the insectoid being chittered. "They took my grandson when we were late with payment. He was studying to be a poet." Another voice joined in. Then another. Story after story of loss, of children taken, of worlds humbled through cruelty. Sarah let them speak, her expression carefully neutral. But inside, her heart raced. This was what she had hoped for. Thax slammed 2 of his 4 fists on his podium. "Enough! The Empire maintains order. Without us, you would all descend into chaos and war." "We prefer chaos to slavery," Sarah said quietly, but her words carried. "And as for war," she paused, pulling up a holographic display. "Let me show you what humans think of war." The display showed Earth's history, not the sanitized version most species presented to the Council, but the real thing. World wars, nuclear weapons, biological warfare, chemical attacks, genocides, the entire bloody, terrible history of human conflict. The chamber grew quiet as the images played. Many representatives looked away. "This is what you threaten to unleash?" Zephron Cole asked, his ancient voice heavy with concern. "No," Sarah said, shutting off the display. "This is what we chose to leave behind. We looked at ourselves, at what we were capable of, and we decided to be better. We reached for the stars not to conquer but to explore, not to rule, but to learn." She straightened her shoulders. "But if the Craxian Empire wants to drag us back to what we were, if they want to threaten our children and expect us to kneel, then they will learn why we locked away our weapons instead of using them. They will learn why we chose peace, because we know what we're capable of when we choose war." Meanwhile, on Earth, the transformation had begun. In underground facilities that had been mothballed for decades, engineers and scientists worked around the clock. Humanity's history of warfare, terrible as it was, had taught them things that the peaceful races of the galaxy had never imagined. Dr. Marcus Rivera stood before a room full of the brightest minds on Earth. Behind him, holographic displays showed Craxian technology, physiology, and tactical doctrine. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we have approximately 6 months before the Empire decides whether we were bluffing. In that time, we need to turn theoretical weapons into practical reality." A hand shot up. "The energy requirements alone for the proposed quantum torpedoes would require 3 times our current global output," Marcus finished. "I know. That's why Team Alpha is working on zero-point energy extraction. Team Beta, you're on delivery systems. Team Gamma, defensive shields. We're not trying to match their technology. We're trying to bypass it entirely." In another facility, Colonel James Patterson addressed a very different audience. These were soldiers, but not just any soldiers. These were the volunteers for Project Prometheus. "You all know what you're signing up for," he said, looking at the 100 men and women before him. "Genetic modification, cybernetic enhancement, training that will push you beyond human limits. Some of you won't survive the process. Those who do will barely be human anymore." A young woman raised her hand. "Sir, why are we doing this? If it's just a bluff?" "Because one day it won't be a bluff," Patterson said. "One day they'll call, and we need to be ready to go all in. Each of you will become capable of fighting a Craxian warrior hand-to-hand. You'll be faster, stronger, and more resilient than anything they've faced. You'll be humanity's answer to their superiority." "What will we be called, sir?" another soldier asked. Patterson smiled grimly. "The Valkyries, because you'll be choosing who lives and who dies on the battlefield." In New Tokyo, Kenji Nakamura had become famous overnight. The boy who stood up to the Craxian Empire. His school was flooded with messages from children all over Earth and beyond. He didn't understand most of it, but he understood one thing. He had made a difference. His art teacher had asked the class to draw what they wanted to be when they grew up. While other children drew firefighters and doctors and astronauts, Kenji drew something different. It was a figure standing between a small child and a large monster, arms spread wide. "What is this, Kenji?" his teacher asked gently. "A protector," Kenji said. "I want to be someone who protects people who can't protect themselves." His teacher saved that drawing. Years later, it would hang in the entrance of the Terran Defense Academy, inspiring thousands of young humans to follow in Kenji's footsteps. The Craxian Empire's response came 3 weeks after the playground incident. A formal declaration arrived at Earth's embassy, delivered by a minor functionary who could barely hide his disdain. Sarah read it aloud to the Earth Council. "The Divine Emperor of the Craxian Empire demands immediate reparations for the insult delivered by the primitive world known as Earth. You will provide 1 trillion standard credits, 100 of your finest warriors for our gladiatorial arenas, and the public execution of the diplomat known as Sarah Chen. You have 30 standard days to comply. Failure to do so will result in the complete annihilation of your species." The council room was silent for a moment. Then, someone started laughing. It was General Morrison, Earth's military commander, a man who hadn't smiled since his daughter died in humanity's last war. "They want you dead, Ambassador," he said, wiping tears from his eyes. "That means you scared them. You scared the most powerful empire in the galaxy with words." Sarah nodded slowly. "How are our preparations coming, General?" "Better than expected. Dr. Rivera's team made a breakthrough with the quantum torpedoes. We can't produce many, but the ones we have will punch through any shield they've got. The Valkyrie program has its first graduates. And—" he paused, savoring the moment. "We've made contact," Contact? Sarah leaned forward. With who? The Resistance. It seems we're not the only ones tired of the Empire's rule. 7 species have reached out through back channels. They want to know if we were serious about standing up to the Craxians. Sarah felt a spark of hope. And what did you tell them? I told them to wait and watch, that in 30 days they'd have their answer. As the Earth Council debated their response, similar discussions were happening across the galaxy. On worlds that had been under the Empire's thumb for centuries, beings looked up at the stars and whispered a word that had been forbidden for generations. Rebellion. The Quellans, an aquatic species whose oceans had been harvested to near death by the Empire, began to retrofit their deep-sea vessels with weapons. The Nox, pacifists who had watched their children taken for centuries, started to remember the warrior traditions they had abandoned. The Pharaon, whose homeworld had been strip-mined until it was barely habitable, began to gather in secret, sharing stories of the old days when they had fought among the stars. All because a human child had stood his ground and a human diplomat had counted down from 10. In his private chambers aboard the flagship Infinite Dominion, Commander Thrax studied everything he could find about humanity. Their history disturbed him in ways he couldn't explain. These humans had weapons that could crack atoms, diseases that could wipe out entire populations, and yet they had chosen to abandon these tools. Why? The answer, when it came to him, was more terrifying than any weapon. They had evolved beyond the need for such crude tools. They had found something more powerful. They had found unity. Every species in the Empire's domain was kept divided. Their worlds were isolated, their communications monitored, their spirits broken. But humans had taken their entire species' talent for destruction and turned it into a talent for construction. They had taken their capacity for hate and transformed it into a capacity for sacrifice. Thrax opened a private channel to Emperor Vrax. Divine One, I have studied the humans extensively. And your conclusion, Commander? We should accept their refusal and leave them alone. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, the Emperor spoke, his voice cold with fury. You would have us show weakness to primitives? I would have us show wisdom, Divine One. These humans, they are not like the others. They do not fear death. They fear failure to protect their young. There is no more dangerous enemy than one who fights not for conquest, but for love. You have grown soft, Commander. Perhaps it is time for younger blood to lead our forces. The channel closed. Thrax stared at the blank screen and made a decision that would change his life forever. He began to encrypt his personal files and prepare a small shuttle. He would not be part of what was coming. On Earth, the countdown had reached 5 days. Sarah Chen stood before the United Nations of Earth, broadcasting to every human settlement in the solar system. My fellow humans, she began, in 5 days, we will give our answer to the Craxian Empire. They expect us to kneel. They expect us to sacrifice one of our own to save the rest. They expect us to be afraid. She paused, looking directly into the camera. They're right about one thing. I am afraid. I'm afraid for our children. I'm afraid for our future. But I am not afraid of them, because fear of bullies gives them power. And it's time we took that power away. She gestured to the screen behind her, showing the formal response Earth would transmit in 5 days. It was 2 words. Come try. The audience erupted. Some cheered, some cried, some prayed to whatever they believed in. But all of them stood united. In deep space, hidden in the sensor shadow of a dead star, ships began to gather. Not Craxian ships, but vessels from a dozen different species. Word had spread through quantum entanglement communicators and black market channels. The humans were going to fight. Captain Zara of the Quellans looked at her mixed-species crew. Are we really doing this? Her first officer, a Nox whose scars told of past resistance, nodded. The humans showed us something we had forgotten. That standing is better than kneeling even if you fall. Set course for Earth, Zara commanded. If they're willing to die for their children, the least we can do is help them fight. Similar conversations happened on every ship. The resistance, which had been a dream whispered in dark corners for centuries, was becoming reality. And it was happening because a 7-year-old boy had been brave, and a diplomat had been clever, and a species had decided that some things were worth any risk. The final day arrived with a sunrise that painted Earth's sky in shades of gold and crimson. Kenji Nakamura stood with his classmates in the school assembly hall, watching the global broadcast. Every human who could watch was watching. This was their moment. Sarah Chen appeared on the screen, standing in the Earth Council chambers. Behind her stood representatives from every nation, every colony, every human settlement. They were dressed not in their formal robes, but in simple clothes, workers' clothes, fighters' clothes. Citizens of the galaxy, Sarah began, her voice carrying across space to every world that would listen. The Craxian Empire has demanded our surrender. They have demanded we sacrifice our principles and our people to their hunger for domination. Today, Earth gives its answer. She held up a small device, no bigger than her palm. This is a quantum entanglement communicator. It connects to every human ship, every human settlement, every human heart that beats in the void. When I press this button, it will send a single command to all of them. The camera zoomed in on her face. There was no fear there now, only determination. The command is this: stand. Stand for your children. Stand for your future. Stand for every species that has been crushed beneath the Empire's boot. Stand even if standing means falling, because falling on your feet is better than living on your knees. She pressed the button. Across human space, things began to happen. Civilian ships revealed hidden weapons. Mining colonies activated defensive systems that shouldn't have existed. The Mars shipyards opened their doors, revealing a fleet of vessels that had been built in absolute secrecy. They weren't many. They weren't powerful by galactic standards, but they were there, and they were ready. But the real surprise came from beyond human space. Jump points opened around Earth, and ships poured through. Quellan vessels, their hulls still dripping with ocean water. Nox sanctuary ships turned from temples to warships. Pharaon mining vessels, their drills repurposed as weapons. Ship after ship after ship, until Earth's sky was filled with the combined fleet of the unheard, the oppressed, the forgotten. On the bridge of the infinite dominion, alarms screamed as the tactical display updated. What should have been a simple punitive expedition against a single world had become something else entirely. "Sir!" The tactical officer's voice shook. "We're detecting over 3,000 vessels converging on Earth. Multiple species. They're all broadcasting the same message." "What message?" the new commander asked, having replaced Thrax just days before. "Stand!" In his throne room, Emperor Vrax watched the displays with growing rage. This wasn't just defiance from a primitive species. This was rebellion. This was revolution. "Prepare the entire fleet," he commanded. "We will crush this uprising before it spreads. Every ship, every warrior, every weapon. We will make an example that will last for eternity." But even as he gave the order, doubt crept into his ancient mind. The humans had done something impossible. They had united the broken, given hope to the hopeless, and turned victims into warriors. All because they had protected a child. As news of the gathering fleet reached Earth, people didn't panic. They had known this was coming. In every city, every town, every settlement, humans prepared, not just for war, but for what would come after. Children were moved to deep shelters. Artists and writers began documenting everything, ensuring that whatever happened, the story would survive. Scientists backed up all of human knowledge, ready to hide it or spread it as needed. And in New Tokyo, Kenji Nakamura sat with his family, watching the ships fill the sky. "Are we going to win, Papa?" he asked. His father pulled him close. "I don't know, son, but we're going to stand. And sometimes that's enough to change everything." The boy nodded, understanding in a way that only children can. Heroes in his manga always stood up to bullies, even when they were smaller, even when they were weaker. Now his entire species was doing the same thing. As the sun set on what might be Earth's last day, Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the orbital defense platform. General Morrison stood beside her, along with the commanders of their new alien allies. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you for standing with us." Captain Zara spoke for all of them. "Thank you for reminding us that we could stand at all." In the distance, jump points began to open. The Craxian fleet was coming. Not just a battlecruiser or a task force, but the entire might of the Empire. Thousands upon thousands of ships, each one capable of devastating a world. Sarah opened a channel to the combined fleet. "This is Ambassador Chen to all ships. You know what's at stake. You know what we're fighting for. Not for conquest or glory, but for the right to protect our children, for the right to say no to tyrants, for the right to stand." She took a breath, thinking of Kenji, of all the children on all the worlds who deserved better than to live in fear. All ships, all hearts, all hopes, stand ready. History watches us now. Let's make it proud. The two fleets faced each other across the void, and for a moment the entire galaxy held its breath. What happened next would determine the fate of countless worlds and countless children yet to be born. The revolution had begun, and it had started with a soccer ball on a playground and a countdown from 10. The first shot came from neither fleet. It came from a small, unmarked vessel that dropped out of hyperspace between the two forces. Commander Thrax's personal shuttle broadcast on all frequencies, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of service to the Empire. "I am Commander Thrax of the Craxian Empire, and I invoke the right of tribunal." Both fleets froze. The right of tribunal was ancient, predating even the Empire itself. It allowed any military commander to demand a hearing before battle, and tradition demanded it be honored. Emperor Vrax's voice boomed across space, fury barely contained. "You dare show your face, traitor?" "I am no traitor, Divine One. I am a soldier who has seen enough. Before blood is spilled among the stars, I would speak." Sarah Chen's voice cut through the tension. "Earth recognizes Commander Thrax's right to speak. We guarantee his safety." "As does the Empire," Vrax ground out, knowing that to deny the right would cost him support among his own forces. Thrax's shuttle moved to the center of the void between fleets. His image appeared on every screen, every display, broadcast to every world that was watching. "I have served the Empire for 300 years, he began. "I have conquered worlds, crushed rebellions, and enforced order across the galaxy. I have taken children from their parents and watched civilizations burn. And for what?" He paused, his 6 eyes focusing on something beyond the camera. "I stood on a playground in New Tokyo ready to kill a human child. A boy who had done nothing but exist. And he looked at me without hate. He asked me why I was being mean. Such a simple question from such a small voice, and I had no answer." Murmurs ran through both fleets. On Earth, Kenji watched with wide eyes as the alien who had threatened him spoke to the universe. "The Empire tells us we maintain order. But what order is built on the graves of children? We say we prevent chaos, but what chaos is worse than parents mourning their young? We claim superiority, but what superior being needs to prove it by crushing the weak?" Thrax turned to address the Craxian fleet directly. "My brothers and sisters in arms, look at what we face. Not a conquering armada, but parents protecting their children. Not warmongers seeking glory, but teachers and workers and dreamers who would rather die standing than live kneeling. Is this the enemy we were warned about? Are these the chaos bringers we must destroy? On the bridge of the infinite dominion, officers looked at each other uncertainly. Many of them had children of their own back on the Empire's core worlds. And to you, humans and your allies, Thrax continued, I offer you truth. The Empire is powerful, yes, but it is also afraid. Afraid of ideas that spread like wildfire. Afraid of unity among the oppressed. Afraid of what you represent. The possibility that beings can choose cooperation over domination. He straightened to his full 9-foot height. I have made my choice. I stand with those who protect children rather than threaten them. I stand with those who build rather than burn. I stand with Earth. His shuttle moved slowly toward the Allied fleet. For a moment, silence reigned in the void. Then another Craxian vessel broke formation, moving to join Thrax. Then another, and another. Traitors! Emperor Vrax's scream echoed through space. Destroy them all! Begin the attack! But the Craxian fleet hesitated. The order to fire didn't come from the military command structure. It came directly from the Emperor, breaking 1,000 years of protocol. In that hesitation, everything changed. Sarah Chen spoke into the silence, her voice calm and clear. To all Craxian warriors, you have a choice. You can follow orders and become child killers, or you can remember why you became soldiers in the first place, to protect, to serve, to stand between danger and those who cannot protect themselves. On Earth, in the shelters, humans and their children watched and waited. In New Tokyo, Kenji's teacher held her students close, whispering prayers in a dozen languages. The first ship to fire wasn't Craxian. It was one of the Emperor's personal guard vessels targeting the defectors. The shot meant for Thrax was intercepted by another Craxian ship, whose captain had decided that enough was enough. And then the void exploded into chaos. But it wasn't the chaos anyone expected. Instead of a united Craxian fleet crushing the rebellion, it was a civil war. Brother fought brother as the Empire tore itself apart. Ships that had served together for centuries now faced each other across targeting screens. The human fleet held their fire, waiting. This wasn't their fight. Not yet. All Allied ships, Sarah commanded. Defensive positions only. Protect the defectors and civilian vessels. Let them choose their own fate. As the Craxian fleet devolved into fratricidal combat, something remarkable happened. Across the galaxy, on every world under Empire control, beings watched their oppressors fight among themselves. And they realized a fundamental truth. The Empire's power came from fear, and fear only worked when it was unified. On Craxia Prime, the Empire's homeworld, civilians took to the streets. They had been told the humans were monsters who would destroy their way of life. Instead, they saw humans refusing to fire on Craxian ships that couldn't defend themselves. The Valkyries, Earth's enhanced soldiers, launched in small craft to rescue escape pods from both sides of the Craxian Civil War. They could have been devastating weapons, but instead they became angels of mercy, pulling wounded warriors from the void. Dr. Rivera watched from Earth's command center as his quantum torpedoes remained unfired. All that work, he murmured, and our greatest weapon turns out to be restraint. General Morrison nodded. The most powerful thing you can do with a weapon is choose not to use it. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted for 6 hours. When the weapons finally fell silent, the Craxian fleet was shattered, not by enemy fire but by its own divisions. A third had defected, a third had been destroyed, and the remaining third hung in space, uncertain and leaderless. Emperor Vrax's flagship floated alone, its escorts having either fled or joined the defectors. The ancient tyrant's image appeared on all screens, his composure finally cracked. "You think you've won?" he snarled. "You think this changes anything? I am eternal. I am divine. I will return with forces beyond your imagination and burn every world that stood against me." But his threats fell on deaf ears. Across the galaxy, worlds that had paid tribute for millennia began to declare independence. The Empire's tax collectors found doors barred against them. The Empire's enforcers found themselves outnumbered by citizens who had remembered what it meant to say no. Sarah Chen spoke for all of them. "Your time is over, Vrax. Not because we defeated you in battle, but because we showed the galaxy that you could be defied, that you were never divine, just a bully with a big stick, and bullies only have power as long as people fear them." She turned to address the galaxy. "To all worlds, all species, all beings who dream of freedom, Earth stands ready to help, not to conquer, not to rule, but to support. We offer technology, medicine, education. We offer partnership, not domination. We offer a different way." The response was immediate and overwhelming. World after world sent messages of support, requests for alliance, offers of friendship. The Galactic Council, which had been the Empire's puppet for so long, voted to recognize Earth as a full member with all rights and privileges. But perhaps the most significant response came from an unexpected source. A small vessel emerged from the wreckage of the battlefield, broadcasting a message from the surviving Craxian military commanders. "We, who were the sword of the Empire, now face a choice," the senior commander said. "We can cling to the old ways and watch our people suffer, or we can learn from this day. The humans showed us mercy when they had every right to vengeance. They protected our wounded when they could have let them die. They offered us a choice when they could have demanded surrender." He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a note of something the Craxian military hadn't expressed in centuries. Hope. "We choose to learn. We choose to change. We ask for Earth's help in rebuilding our society, not as conquerors but as protectors. We ask to join this new alliance, to stand with you as you stood for your children." The vote was close, but Earth and her allies chose to accept. The road would be long and difficult, but the first steps toward a truly united galaxy had been taken. 3 months later, the first Interstellar Council of Free Worlds convened on Earth. Representatives from 67 species gathered not in the sterile halls of Nexus Prime, but in a conference center in New Tokyo, within sight of the playground where it all began. Sarah Chen, elected as the first rotating president of the council, stood to address the assembly. Beside her stood Commander Thrax, now serving as military advisor to the new alliance, and Captain Zara of the Quellans, representing the former resistance movements. "We gather here not as victors and vanquished," Sarah began, "but as equals. We come together not in fear, but in hope. We unite not under the banner of any one world or species, but under a simple principle, that every being has the right to live free from fear, to raise their children in peace, to reach for the stars without chains." The assembly rose as one, applauding not just her words, but what they represented. The galaxy had changed, and it had all started with a single moment of defiance. After the ceremony, Sarah walked to the playground. It had been preserved as a historical site, but children still played there. She found Kenji sitting on the same wall where he had been kicking his soccer ball that fateful day. "Hello, Kenji," she said, sitting beside him. The boy looked up at her with eyes that seemed older than his years. "Did we really change everything, Ambassador?" Sarah looked out at the children playing, human children, Quellan younglings, even a few young Craxians whose families had come to Earth as refugees. "You did, Kenji. By standing when you were afraid, by asking why instead of running. You showed the galaxy that courage isn't about size or strength. It's about doing what's right even when you're scared." "I'm glad no one got hurt," Kenji said. "Even the scary aliens." Sarah smiled, remembering the battle that wasn't, the war that became a liberation. That's what makes us human, Kenji. Not that we can destroy, but that we choose not to. Not that we're without fear, but that we protect others despite it. As the sun set over New Tokyo, casting long shadows across the playground, Sarah thought about how far they had come. Earth had gone from a small, vulnerable world to the heart of a new galactic order. Not through conquest, but through compassion. Not through weapons, but through wisdom. The quantum torpedoes that Dr. Rivera had developed were being converted into medical scanning devices. The Valkyrie soldiers were training peacekeepers from dozens of worlds. The defensive platforms were becoming research stations. Commander Thrax had established an academy where military officers from all species learned not just tactics, but ethics. The first lesson every student learned was the story of the playground. And the question a small boy had asked, "Why are you being mean?" The Craxian Empire, as it had existed, was gone. In its place, the Craxian Republic was slowly emerging, with former soldiers learning to be builders, former tax collectors becoming teachers, former oppressors discovering what it meant to protect rather than terrorize. There were challenges, of course. Not everyone accepted the new order. Pirates and warlords tried to fill the power vacuum. Some worlds struggled with newfound freedom. But for every setback, there were a dozen successes. For every voice preaching return to the old ways, there were hundreds championing the new. 1 year after the confrontation, Kenji was invited to speak at the anniversary commemoration. The 8-year-old stood before representatives of 100 worlds. His small voice carried across the galaxy. "My teacher says I'm supposed to tell you about being brave," he began, clutching his notes. "But I don't think I was brave. I was just a kid who didn't want to run away. I think the brave ones were the grown-ups who chose to protect kids like me instead of fighting." He looked out at the audience, seeing faces of every shape and species imaginable. "My mama says that being strong isn't about hurting people. It's about helping them. She says that Earth showed the galaxy a different way to be strong. I don't understand all of it, but I know that now I have friends from other worlds and they come to play soccer with me and nobody's scared anymore." He paused, then added, "I think that's good." The assembly erupted in applause. Later, historians would mark that speech as the moment when the new galactic order truly began. Not with treaties or fleets, but with a child explaining that strength meant making friends, not enemies. 5 years passed. The Interstellar Council of Free Worlds grew to encompass 200 member species. Trade flowed freely. Knowledge was shared openly. Children of a dozen species attended schools together, learning not just facts but friendship. Sarah Chen, her term as president complete, returned to her role as Earth's ambassador. But she often found herself back at the playground, watching the children play. The memorial plaque was small, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. It simply read, "On this spot, humanity chose to stand. The galaxy stood with us." Commander Thrax, now simply Professor Thrax, taught xenopsychology at the New Tokyo University. His most popular course was The Power of Small Voices, How Children Change History. His students, human, Craxian, and everything in between, learned that true strength came from protecting the vulnerable, not exploiting them. The weapons Earth had built in those desperate months still existed, carefully maintained but never used. They served as a reminder that peace was a choice, one that had to be made every day. The quantum torpedoes gathered dust. The Valkyries aged gracefully, their enhancements now used for rescue operations and disaster relief. But the real legacy of that day wasn't in weapons unused or treaties signed. It was in the children who grew up in a galaxy where differences were celebrated, not feared, where strength was measured in kindness, not conquest, where a small voice asking why could change the course of history. Kenji, now 13, sat in his history class as they studied the fall of the Craxian Empire. His teacher, a young Nox whose parents had been part of the resistance, asked the class what they thought the most important moment was. Hands shot up. Some said it was when the fleet appeared around Earth. Others said it was Commander Thrax's defection. A few argued for the moment the Craxian fleet turned on itself. Kenji raised his hand slowly. "I think," he said, "it was when we decided that protecting people was more important than defeating them, when we chose to be guardians instead of warriors." His teacher smiled. "And when was that decision made, Kenji?" The boy thought for a moment, then grinned. "Every day. We make it every day." Outside the classroom window, ships from 100 worlds passed through Earth's skies. Children of species that had once been enemies played together in the same playground where it all began. The galaxy had learned what humanity had always known in its heart, that love was stronger than fear, that unity was mightier than oppression, and that sometimes the greatest victory was choosing not to fight at all. The Craxian Empire had attacked a human boy. Earth's Diplomat had declared total war. But the war they declared wasn't one of destruction. It was a war on fear itself. And in that war, everyone won. As the sun set over New Tokyo, painting the sky in shades of hope, the children played on. Human and alien, former enemy and newfound friend, they chased balls and dreams with equal enthusiasm. They were building a future where no child would stand alone against an empire, because every child would have a galaxy standing behind them. The revolution that began with a countdown from 10 had become an evolution, not through force, but through choice, not through conquest, but through compassion. The galaxy had learned the most human lesson of all. That true strength lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the courage to protect, the wisdom to forgive, and the determination to stand for what was right, no matter the cost. And in the end, that was humanity's greatest contribution to the stars. Not their weapons or their technology, but their stubborn, impossible, beautiful belief that things could be better, that bullies could be stopped, that children should play without fear, that love could conquer empires. The stars looked down on a changed galaxy, and for the first time in millennia, they saw hope.